microphones at all times. As indicated in the communique from the Speaker to all members on Monday, following measures have been taken to help prevent audio feedback incidents. All earpieces have been replaced by a model which greatly reduces the probability of audio feedback. The new earpieces are black in color, where the former earpieces were gray. Please only use black-approved earpieces. By default, all unused earpieces will be unplugged at the start of a meeting. When you are not using your earpiece, please place it face down on the middle of the sticker for this purpose that you will find on the table as indicated. Please consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. The room layout has been adjusted to increase the distance between microphones and reduce the chance of feedback from an ambient earpiece. These measures are in place so that we can conduct our business without interruption and to protect the health and safety of all participants. Thank you all for your cooperation. And I'm not going to read the rest of the message because that's the same message that I read to you every week. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, October the 17th, the committee is resuming its study of Canadian businesses in supply chains and global markets. We have with us today the Buffalo and Fort Erie Public Bridge Authority, Ron Reynes, Chief Executive Officer. Welcome back, Ron. From the City of Port Colborne, William Steele, Mayor by video conference. Federal Economic Development Agency for Southern Ontario, Steve Masson, Acting Vice President. From the Hamilton Oshawa Port Authority, Ian Hamilton, President by video conference. And Naviga Supply Chain, Matt Weller, Founder. And the St. Lawrence COA Management Corporation, Jean Aubry Moran, Vice President, External Relations by video conference. Welcome to you all. I believe there's one witness that is not online yet. Mr. Hamilton has not been able to connect yet, so we just hold those questions until he's able to join us. So welcome to you all. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to come and share your information and your thoughts with us. We will start with Mr. Reynes. Please, I invite you to speak up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. The Peace Bridge between Buffalo, New York and Fort Erie, Ontario is a critical land border crossing with 1.1 million trucks and 4.5 million cars crossing annually. This public authority is governed by a 10-member international board with the 5 Canadian members appointed by Privy Council upon the recommendation of the Minister of Transport. Canada has invested heavily in trade-related infrastructure, almost $5 billion through the National Trade Corridor Fund, NTCF, and another $6.5 billion for the new Gordie Howe Bridge, as well as other initiatives like the Niagara Trade Corridor. However, since the year 2000, truck traffic across the Canada-US border has declined by almost 25%. In 2023, Mexico surpassed Canada as the top US trading partner. Overall, as a share of all U.S. trade, Canada has declined from 21% in 2000 to 15% in 2023. Infrastructure investment is negated if other government actions or inaction prevent the border from being as seamless and free-flowing as possible. Here are 3 examples. First, because IRCC, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, does not have reasonable service standards for processing the paperwork associated with maintaining or changing status for temporary Canadian residents, it forces people to drive hours to the border where they must cross the border, be denied entry to the U.S., return to Canada, where they then receive immigration services immediately. This process has been termed flagpoling. What happens at the border when some 35,000 annual flagpollers arrive? Well, at the Niagara River crossings, as well as the Champlain crossing, it takes at least 30 minutes per flagpoller to be processed by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, translating to 8 officers a week dedicated to this process. This means that they are unable to staff primary inspection lines, resulting in delays for cars and trucks carrying Canadian exports to the United States. This process is repeated when these temporary residents return to Canada, tying up a similar number of CBSA officers. This process simply should not be happening at the border. During the COVID-19 pandemic, it couldn't because of travel restrictions, and it didn't have to because IRCC granted what was called implied status if a temporary resident had applied online before their status expired. Example number 2. The Peace Bridge is the recipient of a $5 million NTCF grant to construct an innovative commercial pre-arrival project. We are constructing infrastructure in Canada to support technology supplied by U.S. Customs, allowing all trucks to be scanned and manifest data to be collected while in motion and then adjudicated during the 2 to 3 minute transit across the bridge. The result is a much shorter stop at the U.S. primary inspection booth. It's a game changer for the border in terms of enhanced security, while at the same time significantly expediting Canadian exports to the U.S. Why is this project so critical? Well, in 2021, the United States passed the Securing America's Port Act, requiring CBP to plan for 100% non-intrusive inspection for all land ports of entry within 6 years. At the Peace Bridge, it would be impossible to implement that mandate in the United States, and regardless, it is common sense to collect that data in Canada and take advantage of the time and space, resulting in a clearance process that is so much quicker than is currently the case. Unfortunately, we are not able to realize the full potential of this project because thus far, Canada has not approved facial identity verification, allowing CBP to make an admissibility determination to the U.S. in transit, even though every truck that goes through the non-intrusive scan in Canada must in fact enter the United States. Example 3, Treasury Board and the Canada Customs and Immigration Union are at impasse, and there will likely be a strike action this summer seriously impeding the border. The union is telegraphing that, quote, it will bring international borders to a standstill through work to rule action, end quote. Even though the union states work to rule is considered a strike action, and Treasury Board states that most CBSA officers are considered essential and, quote, prohibited from participating in a strike, end quote. This happened in 2021 when the border was essentially shut down with truck queues longer than 7 miles to enter Canada, and supply chains, trade, tourism, and travel all were hopelessly gridlocked. If a free-flowing border is as important as everyone says it is for the well-being of Canada, this simply should not be allowed to happen. Thank you for the opportunity to make these remarks.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Steele for up to 5 minutes, please.
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, fellow witnesses, good afternoon. I want to start off by saying I'm honored to be here before the House of Commons Standing Committee on International Trade. Thank you for the invitation to speak and share my views on Canadian businesses in supply chains and global markets. I think most Canadians will agree with me when I say we are fortunate to be citizens of such a resource-rich nation. Having easy access to raw materials and bulk commodities makes Canada an important link in the whole supply chain system. Every day when I look out my window, whether it's from my truck as I'm driving to work or from my office in City Hall, the bustling traffic on the Welland Canal always reminds me just how much Canada is connected to the rest of the world. As far as I'm concerned, the cargo on the ships passing through Port Colborne is precious cargo. Without any of it, our lives would not be the same. It took a global pandemic for us to realize that we often take the transportation of goods for granted. Since being elected and re-elected as mayor, one of my main priorities has been to champion this message that positive relationships between the public and private sectors are essential. I know I'm not the only one who believes this. The 4 mayors along the Welland Canal, Matt Cisco in St. Catharines, Terry Uglini in Thorold, Frank Campion in Welland, and myself in Port Colborne, have all provided our support for partnerships that will position the Niagara region as a strong multimodal transportation hub. For the past 200 years, Port Colborne's residents have rolled up their sleeves and started businesses and worked hard to making sure the Great Lakes stay a vital trade route for Canada. We're incredibly proud of the progress that's being made today to revitalize our waterfront and transform hundreds of acres of industrial land along the canal. We may be a small town with a community of just over 20,000 people, but we prioritize economic development in a big way. An independent report in 2022 showed that maritime shipping in Port Colborne generates an economic impact of $64.5 million annually. The Great Lakes St. Lawrence region is the industrial and agricultural heartland of both the United States and Canada, with a combined GDP of more than $6 trillion US dollars. This output would represent the third largest economy in the world, behind the US and China, if it were a country. Ontario is the third largest trading partner with the United States after Mexico and China. Now imagine what that number could be for all Lake Erie ports if under a warming climate, year-round shipping became a reality. I've been a long advocate for expanding marine shipping on the Great Lakes, and for a good reason. First, it reduces the number of trucks in urban areas, leading to less strain and congestion on our road or highway infrastructure. Second, it's a more environmentally friendly option, contributing to lower carbon emissions. And finally, increasing shipping activities creates new jobs in the marine industry and allows truck drivers to be closer to home. In saying all this, it may sound like I favor marine shipping over other modes of transport. Truthfully, though, when it comes to optimizing supply chains and ensuring Canada is a leading trade partner, I believe different modes of transport need to work together. That is, be complementary, not competitive. The global marketplace offers Canadian businesses incredible opportunities, but it's not without its challenges. We saw this during the COVID-19 pandemic. Disruptions and inefficiencies in any supply chain don't just hurt the Canadian economy, but also the everyday lives of Canadian consumers. Through my involvement with the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Cities Initiative, I've had productive conversations with fellow mayors as well as government officials about how cross-border supply chains, that is at the land borders and between Great Lakes and ports, are the backbone of Canada's reputation on the world stage. I will wrap up by putting emphasis on the importance of collaborative supply chain relationships. We need supply chains to be sustainable, reliable, and multimodal if we want Canada's place in the value chain to improve. There is no doubt in my mind the federal government should lead by strategically investing in key supply chain infrastructure and by working towards modernizing policy to boost the competitiveness of Canadian businesses. I thank you again for this opportunity to appear before this committee, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Up to Mr. Masson for 5 minutes, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Standing Committee on International Trade. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to be here today. My name is Steve Masson. I'm the Acting Vice President of Policy, Partnerships and Communications for the Federal Economic Development Agency for Southern Ontario, which I will refer to as FedDev Ontario or the agency during my testimony. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the land on which I join you today. It's the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, specifically the Algonquin of Pikwanagan. FedDev Ontario is one of 7 regional development agencies. Our area of focus is Southern Ontario. With offices in Waterloo, Toronto, Ottawa, and Peterborough, the agency provides economic growth programs and services to small and medium-sized enterprises, communities, and organizations. Its mandate is to strengthen the capacity for innovation and clean, inclusive economic growth across a region that is a significant driver of Canada's economy, accounting for more than a third of Canada's population, gross domestic product, and employment. 99% de toutes les entreprises de l'Ontario sont des PME.
90% of all companies in Ontario are small, medium-sized companies, communities, and organizations across the province. In addition, the province has the largest volume of international trade of all provinces and territories, assessed at $760,000 billion, representing exports and imports of goods and services.
Helping SMEs scale, expand to new markets, and integrate into global supply chains is key to fueling economic growth in the region. FedDev Ontario co-invests in projects that help SMEs to develop, commercialize, or produce innovative products, processes, and services, improve productivity, capacity, and competitiveness, and scale up and expand to develop new business opportunities, including diversification into new global markets. In addition to directly supporting SMEs, we also invest in cluster building projects across our innovation ecosystem that can act as magnets for attracting international talent and investment to the region. We also work with not-for-profit organizations, such as business accelerators and incubators, to provide tailored support to our scaling firms to help them along their growth journey and enter new markets. In 2022-23, FedDev Ontario invested $154 million in 135 projects through its ongoing programs. These projects helped create and maintain more than 13,000 jobs and facilitated growth opportunities. Many of these growth-oriented investments have helped SMEs enter new domestic and international markets and reach new customers across a diverse range of sectors, including digital technology, food and beverage manufacturing, and aerospace. Like in other regions of the country, the pandemic highlighted the vulnerability of our supply chains. Through its investments, FedDev Ontario has supported companies to onshore key capabilities and thereby build a more resilient domestic supply chain. In fact, this was a key priority under the Jobs and Growth Fund that we recently delivered. Southern Ontario's economy is highly integrated in both North American and international supply chains, including in the automotive industry. The region is the second largest vehicle manufacturing jurisdiction in North America, with more than 1.8 million light-duty vehicles produced annually in 8 vehicle assembly plants. As this industry evolves and demand shifts to zero-emission vehicles, Southern Ontario's automotive supply chain will be required to adapt and transform to continue to grow. FedDev Ontario is helping to position the region's SMEs and communities to capitalize on this once-in-a-generation opportunity, with over $83 million invested to date in the companies and communities at the epicenter of this transition. Closely linked to the growth of this sector is the importance of maintaining fluid and efficient trade corridors to move parts back and forth across these globally integrated electric vehicle value chains. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here to discuss FedDev Ontario's role as it relates to the committee's study of domestic and global supply chains and Canadian businesses in global markets. I will be happy to answer questions from the committee.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hamilton, I understand you're with us now. I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to speak on this important topic. I'm here on behalf of the Hamilton-Oshawa Port Authority, the largest Canadian port authority on the Great Lakes. I'm happy to be presenting this afternoon alongside our partners from the great city of Port Colborne and the St. Lawrence Seaway. I'll focus my remarks today on the goal I think we all share, and that's trade enabling efficient, reliable supply chains. Supply chains that Canadians can rely on to get the goods where they need them, when they need them. The key to delivering on that goal is ensuring we have adequate supply chain capacity. Two of the most important barriers we are faced with right now are customs clearance support and our ability to build new trade enabling infrastructure quickly and efficiently. The region HOPA serves, Southern Ontario, is Canada's most populous and economically powerful region and is highly integrated with our most important trading partners, the United States. If the binational Great Lakes region were a single economy, it would be the third largest in the world. This region is growing in population and economic activity. The time to build new supply chain capacity is before existing systems fail, and as we have seen over recent years, coming out of COVID, we are already possibly too late. As a port authority, our role is to facilitate trade, build robust supply chains, and create the space for Canadian industries to thrive. But we don't do it alone. We are at the center of the network of stakeholders and partners, including industries, shippers, transportation service providers, and others in the sector. We also rely on the support of organizations such as the Canadian Border Services Agency. CBSA has a critical job to do in regulating the movement of goods in and out of Canada to protect Canadians. We do believe, however, that the agency could strike a better balance to facilitate trade and commerce. Here's an example. HOPA and its partners, Hamilton Container Terminals, have proposed a rail transload facility for pre-cleared containers in Hamilton. This facility would help to expand the diversity, the supply chain aligned with population growth in this busy economic region. It will offer a competitive cost option for Hamilton area importers and exporters, reduce trucking distances, will have positive impacts on congestion and emissions by keeping containers on rail closer to their final destinations. HOPA and ACT have committed to investing in the required infrastructure, which is today close to $30 or $40 million. We have a list of commercial partners and shippers who are eager for the service. We have the support and partnership of CN Rail. We are ready to go. We have made a request to CBSA to provide staffing for this facility, estimated to between 2 and 4 staff. The crest has now been outstanding for 2 years, and we are still waiting. The time to build supply chain capacity is before the next crisis or before the growing population overtakes our current systems. We would invite CBSA to be more forward-looking to enable this and other projects to move forward. The other thing we can do as a country for future-ready supply chains is to invest in the critical trade-enabling infrastructure, especially in the Great Lakes region, sometimes overlooked as a critical trade gateway. The National Trade Corridor Fund facilitated such investments, and I know there have been some questions about the program's impact. So let me share a bit of our experience. Hamilton's Westport is one of the city's oldest harborfront industrial areas, constructed mostly on industrial fill over the course of the century. In 2018, we were awarded $17 million through the NTCF to modernize infrastructure and improve connections in this zone. HOPA matched that federal investment with a further $20 million. The Westport Modernization Project was born. By creating new development parcels and modernizing facilities and infrastructure, HOPA turned the initial investment into long-term value. A couple of years later, we worked with the NTCF again on a $5 million project at Pier 10 in Hamilton, focused on Ontario's grain and food processing supply chains. These projects have more than delivered on the supply chain objectives, fostering increases in cargo volumes, rail volumes, and employment, and more. As a result of these investments, we recently announced the construction of Canada's largest sugar refinery in the Westport zone, leveraging the NTCF's initial investment. This announcement was followed closely by an announcement of an expanded flour mill and additional terminal capacity. Both of these developments are helping to fuel the food processing sector in southern Ontario. These outcomes total almost $250 million in new investment and over $1 billion in economic impact. They are terrific examples of the value of investing in trade-enabling infrastructure that ports can facilitate, and how these minimal investments can be seriously leveraged. The most recent budget made no provision for recapitalizing the NTCF or other flagship infrastructure programs. And we think this is a missed opportunity to deliver more projects like HOPA's Westport project. Port authorities are entrepreneurial government business enterprises created to be self-sufficient, nimble responders to commercial opportunities that bolster Canadian trade. We think we're delivering on that mandate strategically and successfully. We would encourage government to empower ports to do what we do best. We can continue to deliver good projects and good outcomes for the Canadian economy. Thank you for allowing me to address the committee today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hamilton. On to Mr. Weller, please, for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the committee for the privilege to speak to you today. My name is Matt Weller, and I am the founder of Navigate Supply Chain, created to respond to the supply chain challenges of small and medium manufacturers who make up 99.4% of all of Canada's manufacturing. Many of these produce low volume, high value, or complexity products which present a unique set of supply chain challenges seldom discussed and even less addressed. I'm speaking to you today as a practitioner with 24 years experience working hands-on in every supply chain discipline in a variety of industries, and who has seen firsthand the productivity and supply chain challenges that these Canadian manufacturers face at their roots. Our supply chain challenges cannot be addressed solely by export programs, process improvements, technology, AI, or investment. None are the panaceas many wish they were. To be certain, these are all essential and beneficial elements once a firm has become reliably effective in their productivity and profitability, but disastrous if applied without first achieving effective operations. Where SME manufacturers are concerned, the core challenge is in getting to this point. And there are more challenges stacked against them in this regard than I can list in this short address. But executional knowledge, development, and retention is paramount among them. These pre-existing challenges are now being exacerbated by the perfect storm. Declining birth rates and a large retiring demographic mean that capital is already becoming scarce. Arbitrary taxation and regulatory policies are antithetical to competition and productivity and serve to stifle SMEs, which further compound the problem. Globalization is breaking down with new geopolitical impacts on supply every day. And as we lose existing manufacturing resources, future entrepreneurs are being discouraged from manufacturing, believing that physical production is not a viable business model in Canada. Many VC firms will not invest in manufacturing because of the front-loaded capital aspects and the lack of confidence in their ability to produce value. It's time to do something different. Here are 3 suggestions. 1, While industry must inform and lead the solutions to these challenges, a national reindustrialization strategy is needed to coordinate and prioritize those efforts and design a supply chain and business environment that is favorable to productivity. We need to ensure that we can understand, identify, and retain critical manufacturing resources, skills, capacity, and capabilities, and their complex interactions at the detailed levels, which will be needed for both industry and consumers in the much longer term. Taking a whole system thinking approach, we can balance the needs of our economic system and avoid short-term benefits to any particular sector or industry at the long-term expense of our overall productivity and economic stability. This is critical for us to survive the societal, economic, and geopolitical challenges that lie ahead, and the recent pandemic has already demonstrated our vulnerability. 2, education and funding. Young entrepreneurs are taught how to fundraise, market, and sell, but not produce. For manufacturing startups, the default practice is to worry about that later. When later comes, many fail along with the funds invested in them. We need to change this trend in our institutions and incubators, incentivize educational institutions to develop supply chain system thinking for reindustrialization, and actively fill the executional knowledge gap. Funding, government or private equity, could be awarded based on executional knowledge retention in meeting productivity targets, proving the viability of the business with results. This would also serve to de-risk for investors who would not invest in any kind of manufacturing. 3, build a small and medium manufacturing ecosystem. There is a lot that our small and medium manufacturers can learn from our intangibles tech sector in terms of building ecosystems. Our SME manufacturers tend to be unbelievably stretched on resources, poorly networked online, and struggle in isolation. An ecosystem could help tremendously with this, regionally and nationally. It must be industry-led, but encouraged by government. An active ecosystem can leverage broad experience-based knowledge to solve common problems, improve visibility of Canadian manufacturing, and build an inventory of resources and capabilities with collaborative trade networks and relationships across Canada, in addition to existing north-south trade patterns. We need to act post-haste. The world is changing quickly, and it will not wait for Canada. This study brings me optimism that we can have the dialogues and vision to act. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Weller. On to Mr. Aubry Morin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. My name is Jean-Brie Morin. I'm the Vice President, External Relations at the St. Lawrence Seaway Management Corporation. I would like to thank the committee for the privilege to discuss with you the value of the St. Lawrence Seaway, a key link of North American supply chain and an important gateway for the international trade. La corporation est une société à but non lucratif qui a été créée en
The corporation is a non-profit created in 1998 to work on the maritime routes of the St. Laurent. We work closely with the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway Development Corporation, the American partner of our binational network.
St. Lawrence system is a 3,700-kilometer marine highway, including 15 locks, extending from Atlantic Ocean to the head of the Great Lakes. We provide an essential link to a network of inland ports and international connection on both sides of Canadian and U.S. border. Our system supports 355,000 jobs and $30 billion in wage. In 2022, 252 million tons of cargo were moved through the St. Lawrence Seaway waterway, generating $66 billion of economic activity. Marine shipping on the St. Lawrence Seaway is environmentally friendly and cost-effective. One Seaway Max vessel carries the equivalent of 1,000 trucks or 300 rail cars. The Canadian government recently announced a plan for a green shipping corridor on the St. Lawrence Great Lakes system. More shipping moving essential cargo through the system will reduce congestion on our highway, the busy rail corridor, and increase transportation sector efficiency and productivity. Dry bulk, liquid bulk makes the major cargo stream on the system. Essential goods such as grain, iron ore, salt, petroleum, and specialized chemical. Also, project cargo moves on the seaway, from wind turbine to manufacturing equipment. We are well positioned to support the diversification of Canadian goods shipped by water. Since the conflict in Ukraine began, we supported the increase of export potash and grain to meet the international needs. Thanks to the strategic and infrastructure investment, our legendary 99% available rate means shippers don't have to worry about delay getting their product to market. We have available capacity that can be double the throughput of our existing system in response to the future economic opportunity, including the emerging in Canada critical mineral and ongoing decarbonization cargo of supply chain requirement. In addition to the trade growth potential, this way offer a system low in GHG emission. The net zero focus of our benefit is available to all the transportation sector. Through innovation, the SLSMC has reduced its GHG emission by 58% compared to 2005 level, ahead of the mandated 2030 reduction target of the federal government. The recent renewal of our long-term agreement with the Canadian government brings stability and predictability for the corporation and the stakeholder. This 20-year agreement allows the LSMC to continue its mission of maintaining safe, secure, reliable, environmentally friendly, and cost-effective system. Ongoing investment in marine infrastructure through renewed federal infrastructure fund will strengthen the key supply chain and encourage international trade opportunity. It is critical that the Canadian government continue to recognize the essential value of the St. Lawrence Seaway Corridor. I look forward to be able to answer any question that the committee may have. Thank you very much for that opportunity, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, sir. Now we will go on to rounds of questions. Mr. Baldinelli, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being with us today. As a member of Parliament from Niagara, it's wonderful to see so many witnesses who we've invited today that have either come from Niagara or their businesses and their relationships deal with trade and supply chains in the Niagara area. Earlier in the comments from Mayor Steele, he talked of the notion of collaboration, the private sector working together with government agencies to facilitate economic growth. Just yesterday, there was a release that was issued, and it came from the Chamber of Marine Commerce. And the title of the news release says, Chamber of Marine Commerce supports call for government to get out of the way of supply chains. And in its release, it says customs clearance processes are a key part of moving what matters to businesses and consumers throughout Canada. And the federal government is responsible for ensuring these processes are carried out efficiently and effectively. There is an ever-increasing number of examples where the federal government is not living up to that responsibility to the detriment of our economy and the strength of our supply chains. Mr. Hamilton, you had talked about some of the examples with regards to HOPA in Hamilton exactly, and your issues with CBSA. In fact, you had talked about a two-year wait on getting approvals for CBSA staffing for a very important project. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So, as a result of the thanks for the question, but as a result of the I guess the highlighted vulnerabilities of our supply chains coming out of COVID, we realized that we needed to build additional capacity of servicing the GTHA. So we embarked on a project to create a transloading facility for containers that would be brought in by vessel into Montreal. Then we would connect by rail from Montreal into Hamilton and deliver those containers into Hamilton. They would come off the vessel and they would be pre-cleared there for security reasons, and then they would be brought to Hamilton before they would be actually allowed to enter into the economy through CBSA clearance. And what that requires is the creation of what's called a sufferance warehouse. And that sufferance warehouse would be where containers would be held in bond until they were cleared to enter into the economy. So what we applied for was the ability to create that sufferance warehouse in Hamilton between the Hamilton-Oshawa Port Authority and Hamilton Container Terminals. We put up all of the capital and the land resources to facilitate that. And really, all we needed was now CBSA to come in and do the inspections. And where we're a little bit dismayed is that CBSA has come back on a number of occasions and said there's no business case to support that. And yet, when you look across what the container growth is in and out of the GTHA over the last decade, more than doubling. And then you look at other factors like the increasing population size there and population that we're going to see through the GTHA. You realize that this container volume is going to continue to grow, and we need the capacity to be able to meet that demand. And again, could be waiting until it's too late.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And I just want to pivot on that and go to Mr. Reines with the Peace Bridge Authority and some of the issues that you find as well in dealing with CBSA. I mean, we've got the Securing Ports Act, you've got Section 6 of the Customs Act, and now there are the notion of contract negotiations, regardless of where we stand on the contract. It's always that we seem to be negotiating the last contract with our union as opposed to having forward moves to negotiate a contract in the future. So if you could explain some of those issues.
I'll start with the last one. You mentioned the contract. The last contract with CBSA ended in 2022, and my understanding is they're negotiating a 4-year contract, or 2021, it will end in 2025. So if there's settlement this summer sometime, it will basically be good for 1 year, and they'll start all over again. So ideally, the two sides would agree on a longer-term contract to remove some of the uncertainty that's associated with the contract. With respect to the Securing America's Ports Act, the U.S. is moving to their standard operating procedure of 100% scanning of all trucks. Currently, they do about 5 to 10%. So unless we understand what that means in terms of slowing down commerce moving across the border, it needs to be addressed. A 1 hour delay means it's 1 hour less hours of service that the trucker has, which means he might not be able to get his product to where it needs to go. So we at the Peace Bridge, we had to deal with this because we have limited space on the U.S. side. But realistically, it should be addressed at every port of entry, because if you address it at every port of entry, you can actually examine the shipment while it's crossing. And all the major crossings in terms of commerce in Canada are bridges: Blue Water Bridge, Ambassador Bridge, Peace Bridge, and the Lewiston-Queenston Bridge.
Well, and if I'm not mistaken, we have 2 of the 4 busiest commercial bridges in our one riding alone, in my riding alone. And if I'm not mistaken as well, we're the only bridge that has kind of responded to the new legislation through the PAIR program. But what is of great concern is no other bridges are ready for this. I don't think the government is ready for this act.
Well, part of the problem is the bridges are all run differently. So there's Ambassador Bridge is private. The Lewiston-Queenston Bridge runs on a similar model to us. Other bridges take the perspective, well, that's for governments to figure out. We can't wait for the government, because if it gets imposed, and it's just one incident away from becoming mandatory. Right now, the year is 2026. It needs to be addressed. I would have thought that the Gordie Howe Bridge would have incorporated that into their modeling and design, because it only makes sense to do it in Canada and take that time and space to actually adjudicate these shipments.
Madam Chair, how much? Oh, okay.
Please.
Mr. Reynolds, you did mention that the decrease in trade between Canada and US, you seems to expressly state, or at least imply, that is because the border crossing is not seamless. Yes, and we too can use these statistics. You know, we are politicians. We know how to go in for rhetoric. I will give you another number. You said it is declining. In 2022, Canadian exports to US was $436 billion, which was 22% more than 2021. So let's stick to the facts. I know seamless crossing at the borders is important, and improvements in any way is always good. We should aim for that. I think steps are being taken. If we wanted the steps to be much more quicker, faster, it's always good. We'll come to that. And Mr. Weller, you mentioned quite a bit of problems that you say SMEs have faced. I think it's the same words I almost heard 9 years back when I first got elected. Every year I hear the same words. But the manufactured goods are just increasing every single year. Exports of manufactured goods. 2018 it was $318 billion, and in 2022 it was $436 billion. I am not saying things are perfect for SMEs. There are challenges. You mentioned the demographics and the birth rate. Compared to G7 countries, I think only other country that can compete with Canada in terms of the demographic or in terms of the birth rate is the US. Look at all the other G7 countries. We are much better shape on any of the statistics. We can discuss on that. And anyway, you talked about arbitrary tax policies. Why don't you mention that the small business tax rate has actually got reduced by our government? Of course, nobody wants to acknowledge the good things, but that's okay. Mr. Masson, I want to talk about, you said FedDev is helping SMEs integrating to global subchains and productivity. Can you speak about the programs that cater to that?
I would be happy to. Thank you very much for the question, Madam Chair. Let me begin by talking a little bit about FedDev Ontario's programming in general. We provide two main programming offerings. One are investments directly in business through payable contributions at 0 interest % to help companies grow, develop go-to-market plans. The second key intervention we make is with not-for-profit partners that are well poised to help these companies integrate into global supply chains. And I can give you one specific example around that, which is the project that we funded with the Toronto Region Board of Trade for their Trade Accelerator program. This was specifically geared towards smaller SMEs that had about a year or two of market traction already. They came in through a 6-week curated program that the Board of Trade put on to help them develop sector-specific strategies for the markets they were targeting. And at the end of that program, they would come out with an export strategy that would help them as a springboard.
I'll come back to because my time is limited. I have got a quick question for Mr. Hamilton. Mr. Hamilton, HOPA Ports and McMaster's Institute for Transportation and Logistics, I think you came out with a study for the increased use of short sea shipping in the Great Lakes. I was not aware of the short shipping viability. Are there any specific examples in other parts of North America or other parts of the world where short sea shipping is quite viable?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And the likelihood is that we're probably the only jurisdiction where it's not working well right now. It certainly works very well in Europe. It works along the Mississippi River in the United States, and it works quite well throughout Southeast Asia and Asia between the various different countries there. So yeah, no, there's a lot of examples of how it helps to alleviate the pressure on our ground transportation network, and has the capability of reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. I got limited time. I'm sorry to cut you off. I have a question to Mr. Jean Arbery-Morin of the St. Lawrence Seaway Management Corporation. You mentioned about the marine corridor in the St. Lawrence system. Can you slightly expand on that?
Yeah, Madam Chair, thanks for the question. I'm referring to the Green Shipping Corridor. That is a collaborative effort between U.S. and Canada, but for the St. Lawrence Seaway and the Great Lakes to allow collaborative effort to remove what I would call gaps and delay in the system to increase fluidity, and also allows the environmental benefit to be more deliver or more proficient inside the corridor.
Just 1 second. Can you expand what that the Green Shipping Corridor actually means?
Yes, through the COP27, the U.S. and Canada has expressed the interest for the marine industry to be able to collaboratively work together, to be able to establish the driver to put in place all the elements of having transportation on water to be able to be supporting growth of the economy as we go forward. So you're talking about reducing delay and using biofuel to reduce 80% emission from the vessel themselves, or using electrification at the port on the shore to be able to reduce, when the vessel is idle, the emission itself. These are typical example that we use in the seaway system.
On to Mr. Savard Tremblay for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci à
Thank you,
l'ensemble.
Madam Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses today for your presentations. My question is for Mr. Morin, and in March 2023, the government it announced an agreement so that the corporation would manage and operate the Seaway. That it included governance mechanism. What were you able to improve, Madam Chair? It was about being able to structure research and commitment from the 47 committees or communities that use the Seaway, and it was to officialize our relationship as well, that it have been ongoing for more than 2 decades since the corporation was signed with First Nations. So with whether it's Kanawaki or the Mississauga, the First Nations of Welland Canal. All right, that was a year ago, but what has been done since? Can you tell us? So I can give you a specific example. All of the projects on the Welland Canal dealing with electrification and the creation of a new supply chain for batteries, both of those underwent consultations with First Nations and the communities that our colleagues were referring to earlier, to make sure that there was support both at the environmental, social, and economic levels. And what were the impacts? Can you already see some impacts on those from those initiatives? Yes, and I was speaking about this earlier. So the Seaway has already reached its reduction initiatives, or targets rather, with regard to our 2030 targets for greenhouse gas reductions. So that was done with collaboration and feedback from the First Nations and the adjacent communities that helped us adjust our actions and our strategies. Right, before renewing the agreement with Transport Canada, there was a review of the Seaway, and most stakeholders had said that the Seaway could support higher traffic. Now, has traffic increased in the Seaway in recent years? Yes. Our success is based on our reliance and our ability to rise to the challenges that we face. So with regard to potash, for example, and so yes, 42% of our capacity is used currently, and the increase of that capacity has been targeted by certain projects. So in Port Colborne, for example, Wharf 18 will see new investments that are supported by funding for the corridor. So there will be an increase in 1 million tons going through that wharf. And that's just an example of a number of the projects. All right, that's an increase, but what are the impacts of that increase? What would those be? Environmentally speaking, we're thinking that there will be a decrease in impact. So that cargo was using other transportation modes, or if they used other transportation mode, the impact would be higher. So earlier, I was saying that for each ship, we're talking about 1,000, the equivalent of 1,000 trucks on the road, or 300 train cars. So we're talking about we're talking about millions of trucks that were, and we were also thinking in terms of the reduced congestion on the street. So that's what it's that type of thing that this the Seaway has, using the Seaway more has. Now, are there any things that we need to look at in terms of the shoreline? Yes, in terms of erosion, most or the program that's set in place with First Nations and the communities allows us to reduce impact or to minimize at least the impact of erosion on the shoreline. And increasing maritime or marine traffic will not increase that environmental load.
26 seconds remaining.
26 seconds, I think I'll keep it for another turn there. Thank you.
Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I think I'll start with Mr. Reynes from the Peace Bridge. This whole idea of the Americans wanting to scan 100% of the trucks, I find very interesting in many ways. Is this a policy that they want to institute at every border crossing, or just starting with major ones? You mentioned a 2026 timeline, I think.
So the legislation is very clear. It indicates that by 2026, CBS or CBP, Customs and Border Protection, must have a plan for every truck entering the U.S. southern border and northern border. So they're phasing it in. The largest acquisition that U.S. Customs has undertaken is the acquisition of non-intrusive inspection equipment. Over the last couple of years, 3-4 years, I think it's in excess of $1 billion. A number of southern ports have already gone 100% inspection for obvious reasons, but it is coming to the northern border, and at Peace Bridge, we will be the first border crossing, but it's coming to all of them.
So, and you mentioned that the biggest truck volume border crossings in Canada are those bridges. West of the Great Lakes, of course, the border is just a line in the dirt, and so the trucks are crossing on roads. Maybe if, I'm just fascinated to hear about this technology. You say it's done as the trucks are moving across the bridges?
Correct. The new technology is called multi-energy portal. So the cab gets scanned at a low dosage, if you want to call it that, and then the cab is a much higher energy. So yes, every truck can be done. It's done now at some ports, and every port has some form of X-ray equipment. But what happens now is the driver has to get out of the truck. And so it's done even at the land border crossings. Every truck going into the U.S. has X-ray equipment. The new technology is much more efficient in terms of allowing trucks to do it at motion at 5 miles per hour. So when you have a port like ours that has 5,000 trucks a day crossing, it's important that we keep these trucks moving. If you go to 100% with the driver having to get out, the borders come to gridlock.
And so this phase-in will happen over the next year and a half, I assume?
It's happening now.
Right.
Sometimes these schedules slip, as has oftentimes happened, but the schedule in the legislation is 2026.
And so, and you're suggesting that in many cases that this will happen in Canada before, I mean, the scanning has to happen before the trucks enter the United States?
It doesn't have to happen in Canada. What I'm saying is if it happens in Canada, it means the truck doesn't have to stop on the U.S. side to get adjudicated. So the way it works is the truck gets scanned, and then there's a command center where there's people that are watching the scan. It's going to be replaced by artificial intelligence in a few years, but it still has to, the truck has to sit there and wait. The beauty of putting it in Canada is it allows that adjudication to take place while the truck is crossing the bridge, the 2 to 3 minutes. Otherwise, it has to sit there and wait for 2 to 3 minutes. And that backs up very quickly if you can't do it while it's in motion.
Okay, this is, and what are the, and I'm sorry if I was caught up in all this while you were giving your statement. So, and what are the real challenges for us right now that the federal government could help in?
Well, I think there's two things. One is being aware that it's happening, and it could have a big impact if we're not ready for it by 2026. And the second thing is we want to include facial verification. Customs already has the photograph of the drivers in their system. What we're saying is include that in the information packet of the cargo being scanned and the drivers and the license plate being scanned and the RFID technology and all that, include the facial identity, because those trucks that are scanned must go to the US. The opt-out, if a truck doesn't want to do that, is before the scanning. Once it's scanned, it has to go to the US. Include the facial piece in there, because then everything can be adjudicated and there will be no need to stop at the US primary inspection booth, which facilitates the movement of Canadian exports into the US.
And do you see this happening at the land border crossings, like Pacific border crossing in British Columbia and places like that?
Yes, it will be happening at every port of entry coming into the US. The non-intrusive inspection will be there. What we're saying is at the big crossings, when you have a bridge where there's going to be time to adjudicate, why not put the technology on the Canadian side? Because it facilitates the movement of goods and traffic. It happens very similar in many ways to what happens at airports in the pre-clearance mode, where people are actually cleared in Canada, and then when they get to the US side, they're free to go.
Right. And that in airports, that includes a facial recognition
Yes.
piece? I mean, when I have to stand there and get, it never works for me.
We're not part of the pre-clearance model because this is in the cargo environment, which is different, but the principle is very much the same.
Right. And the Canadian government is concerned about the facial recognition piece?
They were when we made our original National Trade Corridor Fund application. So we got approved. We got an IBTA, International Bridge and Tunnels Act permit to do the technology, but did not include facial verification. So we have applied again at the beginning of March. We applied to Transport Canada to add the facial verification piece. We haven't heard anything yet as to whether that will be approved or not. What I'm saying is we're building it this summer. It would be nice to incorporate it now and allow us to have the full package done by the end of the year.
And
0 seconds left.
0 seconds, sorry. I could go on.
Mr. Seebeck, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just want to jump back on something that Mr. Aria was trying to say about trade. So actual trade volume in Canada went down from the latest State of Trade report. The actual dollar value went up, but the actual volume of trade went down. And it went up because of inflation and things like the carbon tax. So same thing with our percentage of the U.S. market. While our trade value may have gone up because of inflation and the carbon tax, we've lost market share. When you're losing market share, you're losing. It's why we're now their third largest trading partner. You can try and put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. And that's the Liberal record on trade. And part of the problem is infrastructure. In our trade infrastructure, we know the Canada West Foundation put out a report that our trade infrastructure has precipitously declined in the last 12 years. So I wanted to ask Mr. Weller a question. To add to the problems with this, the radical Liberal environment minister said we shouldn't invest in roads anymore. Like roads are these terrible things. I think roads are critical for trade. I suspect everyone here might agree with that. And we probably need to expand our roads to be able to expand trade. Mr. Weller, would you like to comment on that?
Sure, Madam Chair, through you. Regardless of whether our future is a green economy or not, infrastructure is going to be a critical piece of it. So in order to meet the needs that we're going to need for green energy, for solar panels, EV production, requires not just having the resources of minerals, but the extraction of the minerals, the processing of the minerals on a scale that we haven't seen before. We're talking about an industrial build-out we haven't seen before, which is why I mentioned that we need to reindustrialize. Frankly, from a practitioner's perspective, the goals that have been set are not attainable in the current environment. We probably should have started years ago to get there. It's not the popular answer, but that is the reality of it. Yeah, you're going to need roads for sure. You're going to need infrastructure. You're going to need power grid updates. You're going to need municipal infrastructures to support the communities that are involved where this is going on, and on and on and on. And you are going to need some sort of overarching coordination of all of it, not the individual pieces of it. But in order to actually get an overall benefit to the entire system, you have to coordinate all of it together. And that's what I refer to when I say a whole system thinking approach.
With infrastructure. So part of supply chains are going to be infrastructure. So the government actually commissioned a report, the National Supply Chain Task Force report, and it said that we have major investments needed in highway and road structures and other networks. 3.3 trillion, right? And this includes railways and ports and everything else. But I was shocked to see in the federal budget there is virtually no investment actually in this critical infrastructure. Canada's a trading nation. Like 60 to 70% of our GDP comes from trade. So these investments are sort of critical. What do you think about where we are on the investments that we're getting to support supply chain and train infrastructure with what the government seems to be offering?
Sure. Well, again, I'm going to speak from purely from the manufacturing perspective because that's the background from which I'm involved. I think we simply need more investment towards productivity. So when we talk about supply chain, when we talk about export, when we talk about export development, increasing trade, when we talk about any of these things, what we're ultimately talking about is productivity. That is the measure as far as a national economy is concerned. I don't need to go into detail about the Bank of Canada's recent statement about productivity. Everybody in this room knows the numbers. I don't need to quote them. I would say that the record has been poor, and that is not to denigrate any political party, but I say that with the optimism that we can do better once we start to see how these pieces actually fit together. We can coordinate a response to that and improve it. I think we can improve it. Canada is rich with resources. We need to focus on being able to process those resources, not just sell them, so that we can buy them back down the road, further down the value chain at a higher value.
Can do in 16 seconds. Thanks,
Okay,
Madam Chair.
thank you very much. Mr. Badaway for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for having me on committee today, and I do appreciate the presence of all the witnesses here this afternoon. I'm going to start off by saying this, that throughout both the United States and Canada, leaders are prioritizing regionally based hubs. Where the production happens, they're concentrating on those areas where the sales happen within some regions to streamline logistics, improve inventory management, and accelerate response to market demand. With that, this committee has taken on a supply chain study. There's outcomes that are expected to come out of this study. You folks are tasked on your daily, with your daily business and everything that you're doing on a daily basis to help move goods and people, to create that fluidity, and then secondly, to look at different mechanisms that we as government, whether it be policy or financial investments, that we as government can actually partner with you to then help you meet your goals. So with that said, I do want to first concentrate on Mr. Hamilton with respect to some of the projects that the Hamilton-Oshawa Port Authority is working on right now. I know in Niagara, being a Niagara Member of Parliament, we've been very successful at integrating our multimodal network, looking at land acquisition and really creating a new economy. I know we can't talk about much of that new economy yet. There will be a day for that. But with that said, Mr. Hamilton, and next I'm going to go to Mayor Steele. What are some of the wins that are happening both not only in Niagara but also in Hamilton and Oshawa? Mr. Hamilton.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks, Vince. Parliament Secretary, what we've focused on is one of our vision is to create and lead an integrated port network in southern Ontario. And what we've really wanted to try to do is to combine together assets so that we can ensure that the cargo is moving through the most efficient supply chain and the most efficient port of entry, but also we can concentrate the infrastructure investment so we can get the biggest bang for our buck. Now in Hamilton, one of our challenges has been that we've run out of space, and the space that we do have is becoming increasingly expensive. And looking towards the Niagara region, we saw a real opportunity to take advantage of the industrial space that was available, access to the marine as a supply chain through the Welland Canal, and a good road network and proximity to the U.S. border. So over the last couple of years, as we've entered into Niagara, we've been able to, with our partners, invest about $100 million, and now have about 800 acres that we've been developing, and home to 12 tenants, all of which are really there because of their access to great supply chains. Where we see future investments is better utilizing the particularly the St. Lawrence Seaway, and how do we get better access to the water, and again give these companies better, more sustainable and robust supply chains by combining that multimodal nature of road, rail, and marine together.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. And obviously, that is creating some productivity within the region, as well as within the province of Ontario.
Yes, certainly. Where we look at it is that for every dollar we spend, we're probably able to attract an additional $8.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. To Mayor Steele, can you elaborate?
Yeah, I mean, with Port Colborne and being the gateway to navigation for the Welland Canal on Lake Erie, the open land that's been left from former industrial sites and right from the water, Lake Erie water, to our north end border with Welland. We've got vast tracts of land. Some of that's under the control of private enterprise, and some with the St. Lawrence Seaway Authority. Now with HOPA coming in for a number of acres within the city, we're looking to enhance that marine industry, and I'm glad Jean Aubry spoke about the big project in Port Colborne, approximately $45 million to rehabilitate Wharf 18, 1, 2, and 3, which has been out of service for approximately 10 to 15 years, and the private enterprise that they have partnering with them on that project. Ian's project on the old Algoma steel plant, getting that back into service with, as Ian talked about, multimodal. I mean, Port Colborne's lucky, and Vance, as you served as mayor of Port Colborne for quite a long time, and I served with you as a councillor. But we own our own rail. We own our own port here alongside the St. Lawrence Seaway. We run our own government, the former government elevator for grain that passes from the Upper Lakes down in through Niagara and then out to the seas to foreign markets. But there's so much land here that could be redeveloped along the canal. But it is infrastructure money, has been talked about by many witnesses here today. But it really needs to be coordinated between all of us, both private and the public sector, so that we get these lands developed as fast as possible and get them out to market. We're developing a brand new commercial industrial subdivision that's right alongside the St. Lawrence Seaway Canal. But with us is private enterprise with about 600 acres, the St. Lawrence Seaway with probably about 100 acres approximately there, and then the city of Port Colborne with another about 80 acres that we're developing. So we all need to work together. We need to get the companies that are coming to Canada. And quite frankly, I think you're going to see more and more. I think the Honda announcement last Thursday in Alliston is really the tip of the iceberg, and it's really bodes well for the political climate of North America, both in Canada and the U.S. When you've got the issues in Asia, you've got the issues in the Mideast, and quite frankly, some issues in Europe right now that you're looking at having companies move here. Port Colborne is seeing a company called Youngbloodslauer, or JBL as we call them. They're one of the largest citric acid plants in the world. They're moving a new xanthan gum plant to Port Colborne. It's going to double the size of their plant. So these are just things that are coming along, but we need to be ready. And we quite frankly, we need to be ready yesterday, not tomorrow.
Okay, thank you very much. On to Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 2.5.
Oui, mais suivrai la discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to pick up where I left off with Mr. Morin. So some stakeholders, and I'm coming back to the question of the review of the St. Lawrence that was undertaken, some stakeholders said that reviewing the cabotage and piloting system could make the Seaway more competitive. Is this something that is it a view that you share? Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question. When we talk about supply chains, we talk about fluidity and movement. So the quickness for moving products is part of the solution. So either through the use of technology or by coordinating the movement. And so regardless of the contributing factor, yes, the answer is, as Mr. Weller and Rena were saying, products have to be moving continuously. And that's the success of the Seaway. It's because we've invested in technology to ensure that coordination. So what needs to be changed and what has already been done so far? Thank you. So what we're doing right now is putting in place a third generation of ship management, of a ship management system, and coordination of multimodal transportation so that things are quick and efficient. So that we can make decisions proactively to avoid delays and stoppages. So that's the technology. We're developing technology at this moment and so that it includes piloting in the Great Lakes and other actors, so whether they're ports or logistics related. Thank you. All right, it's 17 seconds. I think that's not enough time to ask a question.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'd like to turn to Mr. Weller, and I only have 2.5 minutes. And you talked about a reindustrialization strategy. I don't know if you can talk about that in 2.5 minutes, but I just would like to know what caused our deindustrialization and what have we learned in recent years, especially during the pandemic, about our supply chains that we can reindustrialize and make those supply chains more resilient.
Through you, Madam Chair, there's a lot in that question to unpack. I will try as quickly as I can to reiterate what caused the failures. Several things. We had, beginning in the late 90s, we had a lot going on. It got worse with, I said we were at our peak in the late 90s. What basically happened was you had the financial crisis that happened in 2008, kind of pushed us over a cliff. Canada's dollar became par, which hurt a lot of manufacturers. And between 2001 and 2010, Canada's medium manufacturers shrank by 51%. At the same point in time, imports from China grew by 456%. So competition on a global scale is kind of what led to the demise. We've never recovered. And that from an employment perspective, the data shows that we haven't recovered yet. We're not picking up.
So basically that globalization has caused that deindustrialization. And what can we do to?
Well, sure. So this is why I say reindustrialize. When we talk about supply chain, we talk about trade, we talk about export, we talk about purchasing, we talk about manufacturing. These things on their own are no more supply chain than a set of tires as a car, right? They're components of supply chain, but when we're talking about supply chain, we need to talk about the whole system. There has to be an overarching balance struck in terms of coordinating all those efforts, all those resources, which are necessary. Don't get me wrong. They're absolutely, everything we have going on in Canada is necessary. I don't wish to take away from any of that. But we need to coordinate it in a level that looks to the future, to the scale that we're going to need it. The world is breaking down on a globalized scale. Right now, we depend on a lot of imports. We have retired and outsourced a lot of our capabilities. We need to get them back, not only for our own sake, but also to now export to others who it's less advantageous for them to have the same skills. This can be coordinated. When I say reindustrialization, it's an opportunity to set a strategy that will cover investments, infrastructure, and everything else to bring it all together in a coordinated way where we're not satisfying ourselves in the present and hurting ourselves in the future.
For that information, Mr. General, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to, just a quick question, then share my time with one of the hardest working members of Parliament there is from Niagara Falls, Mr. Baldinelli, after this. First of all, though, Mr. Reynes, you talked about flagpoling, And I think that's maybe you kind of glanced over at the beginning of your testimony, and wouldn't mind if you kind of just maybe flesh that out in a bit more detail on certain things that the federal government can do, because I think that's certainly something that should be part of our report going forward.
Yeah, so my whole point is that you can invest tons of money in infrastructure, but if you don't have policies to support that, or policies that actually hurt that investment, you really kind of are defeating yourself. So what happens with flagpoling is we have IRCC during the pandemic, when you couldn't go to the border, they had an online system, and if you applied before your work permit or your residency permit expired, you were given what was called implied status. Once the border reopened, went back to the old way. People apply, they don't get their approvals for 9 months, 12 months. In between, their work permit is expiring. So to assure themselves that they can stay in Canada, they go to the border, because there they have to be processed immediately. The problem is it ties up U.S. Customs officers, which means they're not out there working to clear trucks going into the U.S. So you understand how it all kind of fits together. And then when they get their paperwork refusal in the U.S., they come over to Canada, they have to go into secondary, tie up CBSA officers that aren't out working primary to allow imports to come into Canada or tourists to come into Canada. So to me, it's quite simple. Go back to what you did during the pandemic. Give people implied status and say, don't go to the border. Do it the way it should be done in 2024. Do it online. And more importantly, have a service standard that says you're going to get your work permit within 21 days of applying for it, or 30 days. So there's no need to wait 9 months and fear losing your work permit. To me, it's low-hanging fruit that should be addressed.
Mr. Baldinelli.
Thank you, and thank you to my colleague for ceding some time. Recently, the St. Lawrence Seaway announced that nearly 38 million tons of cargo transited the binational seaway in 2023, so that's up 3.4%. I mean, that relation and that growth leads to jobs and job creation. And I mean, if you think about Niagara, we're within an 8 hours drive, and we've got the seaway there of hundreds of millions of people within that area. Mayor Steele, you talk of the need of collaboration in your work and your efforts with both HOPA and the St. Lawrence Seaway Authority, and how we can unleash the potential of Niagara. You know, the National Supply Chain Task Force indicated over a 50-year period from 2020 to 2070, investments of about $4.4 trillion going to be needed, and the majority of that is going to be in the road structures, about $3.3 trillion. There had been talk in Niagara for a long time of the need for a mid-peninsula corridor. It would tie nicely into the whole multimodal aspect of what's going on in terms of the investments and trade that happened in Niagara. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Thanks for the question. Yes, I mean that goes back quite a long time ago, and it keeps popping its head up from time to time. It's probably a project that still should be looked at, especially to move trucks between the Peace Bridge, where Mr. Reines is, all the way up to the Hamilton Airport, which is one of the largest cargo airports in Canada, and then across the 403, 401 corridor. I mean, it would alleviate a lot of the QEW coming in from the GTA down into Niagara over the Burlington Skyway, and at least it'll get people moving faster. But quite frankly, it's more than just highways. It's actually our rail system. Our rail system, quite frankly, in Niagara isn't the greatest system. There are some inefficiencies there. I think, you know, we ripped out lots of tracks over the years, and then now we look back and say, geez, I wish we had those again. Specifically, the Buffalo to Detroit line that followed Highway 3 all the way from the Buffalo Fort Erie to Windsor, Detroit. I mean, having that line today would alleviate a lot of things. I think one thing I've said and a lot of the other people have said today is the fact that, you know, we're not here to take away rail or trucking and making everything go through the St. Lawrence Seaway Authority with shipping. We're trying to meld everybody together so that we can all work together, but instead of trucks traveling for hours and hours on end, we can actually ship more, and a number of people, both Ian and Jean Aubry, spoke about this with regards to the cargo on the ships and how many trucks it takes off the road, how many rail cars it takes off the rails. But short line rail is something that we can look at for Southern Ontario. Also short trucking with a lot of firms. Just in our neighborhood, we have one short line trucking firm that travels in Southern Ontario for all the goods for the markets that he deals with. Those things need to be looked at, and that's how you look at the environmental aspect of this and getting rid of CO2, and also looking at the electrification of shipping. Hydrogen fuel for shipping is another thing. A possibility is how we're going to look at even airlines with biofuel from grain for the airlines, and how we can start processing those types of commodities here in Southern Ontario within Niagara.
Okay, thanks. So you're way over. Thank you very much. Mr. Sheehan for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'll be sharing some time with Vance, very hardworking former mayor in the Niagara regions too as well. My first question is, of course, to the FedDev, and I would be remiss without acknowledging your work in steel. I'm co-chair of the All-Party Steel Caucus, and recently we had Ambassador to Japan in Sault Ste. Marie, and he was certainly pointing out something you alluded to was the EV supply chains that we haven't talked a lot about. But could you talk and expand a little bit more about the opportunities for, say, the steel industry and other industries as it relates to the EV battery announcement that Honda recently made? A lot has been talked about the mining, a lot of talking about the car production, but you know, the investments both in Hamilton and Sault Ste. Marie. And Sault Ste. Marie was a $420 million announcement, which is generational in funding. We were saying that in 2021. I was glad to hear it again and again and again. It's going to anchor Sault Ste. Marie for a long time, because if you recall, FedDev did make an announcement with the previous federal conservative government. I remember on July 24th, 2015, I won't forget the date, because it was a week later there was an election. However, after I had won, I was called to a meeting even before I was sworn in, and Algoma Steel was going into restructuring. So, you know, that's another debate about the kind of due diligence that the previous government had done in that. But on this particular investment, it's going to take 1 million cars off the road, close to it, gas-powered. And where else do you see these supply chains, you know, expand on the Algoma Steel example? Because the ambassador was very impressed, because he made the point, and a lot of people made the point, it's not just governments, it's the market, it's the people. Like someone who wants to drive an electric vehicle, if there was somebody who was competing against that steel industry, would point out, well, that's being made with coal. So perhaps if you'd like to expand on that, and then after you're done, I'll pass my time to Vance.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for the question. As I noted in my opening remarks, the transition to electric vehicle production in Southern Ontario has been quite rapid and transformational in creating a number of supply chain opportunities across the region. Certainly with large steel producers and those, you know, both with Algoma and what's happening with Dofasco down in Hamilton in terms of greening their operations, tremendous opportunity to connect green steel products into the production processes for automotive parts, supplying EV production going forward. I think there's also a tremendous amount of opportunity to build that corridor to connect some of the resource extraction around critical minerals in Northern Ontario and get them down to market through the south. And we're already seeing some talk of that around a North to Niagara type corridor emerging. I think what's truly unique about our region when it comes to the EV supply chain is that it is one of the only jurisdictions in North America where you have that overlap of a very dense technology cluster with a very dense manufacturing cluster. And that opens up a whole new range of opportunities for suppliers, not just when it comes to traditional manufacturing, but also on the automotive technology side and being able to leverage new technologies, including artificial intelligence, cybersecurity-based solutions to drive the component parts of the future.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Terry. I guess I'll say this. You know, we're not here to speak. We're here to allow you to speak, and therefore getting on the record to the analysts your desires and of course, your expectations. Fluidity, capital investments, data, digital, list goes on. You know, we heard from Mr. Hamilton with respect to the establishment of the Niagara Trade Corridor. We worked very hard on that. with Hamilton and Oshawa. We know the economic investments that are underway. We know the economic investments that are going to happen. The supply chain and logistics strategy is something that I hope comes out of this as an outcome of this committee. As the PS Parliamentary Secretary for Transport, it's something that I'm very eager to start on with our partners within the supply chain office. We've heard from HOPA once again of what their successes were within the investments that they're making along, especially the Welland Canal corridor. So I guess my question is to Mr. Jean-Aubry Morand with respect to their intentions on behalf of the Seaway to economically develop the Welland Canal corridor in partnership with a lot of the stakeholders that are existing there today. Mr. Morand?
Yes, Madam Chair, Mr. Badaway, thanks for your question. I think I'm going to start with one word: collaboration. Right now, there's 6 major projects along the Welland Canal as a corridor that we've put our basically support and expertise behind to make sure that the promoter themselves, the community, and elected official also have all the technical support necessary to be able to, from the concept level to the project situation, that all the gaps and all the hurdles are removed as much as possible. So every dollar that could be invested in the corridor could get its full potential. So to go back to a comment that was made before, and I think, Mr. Badaway, you mentioned it, fluidity equals productivity when it's not not abated. So full fluidity will give us what we need. So what we're doing right now is supporting all these projects. And I think the one that we're talking about a minute ago about EV, critical mineral, water and power are 3 ingredients that will permit the supply chain in that case to be able to be successful. And that's the full support and collaborative contribution we're doing.
Martel, for 5 minutes, please.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses to be here. My question is for Mr. Morin. Mr. Morin, you said earlier that there is a potential for the export growth. We have the capacity to support more. So what I'm thinking is, what are the current obstacles that makes it so that we're not here? Madam Chair, Mr. Martel, I think the easiest way to respond to your question is to talk about all the delays and on all the inconveniences that make it so that the movement of goods and cargoes and all the various the shipping, whether it's by rail or sea or anything, it is delayed for all the reasons that were mentioned by my colleagues here. So we're talking about having a certain volume that we're capable of having on a network, but we're not using it to its maximum value. And we have a great loss. So we're talking about having a system that would maximize the use of those resources, including the seaways, by putting into place a system that would allow for management in real time of the data that are required for decisions to be made, whether it's piloting, moving, and the use of the various infrastructures on the seaway. Okay, we know that the level of trust of businesses in the face of infrastructure in this country have really dropped, and we are at the 32nd rank in the world. So knowing that your business has a new agreement since March with Transport Canada, is there a solution in that agreement? Through the chair, I would like to talk about the model productivity that we did. If we talk about the investment that we have done in innovation since the commercialization in 1998, we were able to double the productivity in the seaway. We were talking about the scanners for CBSA. We were talking about the use of automatic pilot. If we had the same kind of if we had the same approach, so that it would help with the decision, if this was replicated throughout the system, we could see rapidly how the agreement, the long-term agreement that we have signed with the federal government would allow us to be an influential actor and a collaboration actor with the other agencies so that we could basically replicate the same business model. So our current issues in the transport infrastructure, what are those issues and those challenges, and what do you suggest? Madam Speaker, I missed the beginning of the question. Could you please repeat? What I would like to know, based on your perspective, what are the biggest issues when it comes to transport infrastructure, and what are the solutions that you are suggesting? Madam Chair, what made the Seaway the success that it is that we can see that we are a very strong link in the transport chain. So the reliability and each of the dollar that has been invested has had a greater return. When we were investing several million in a lock that lived for 80 years, 25 years ago, the same dollar allows us to have a lock that now can live over 120 years. So we can invest with a much better return on investment. And thus we will be able to have a reliability, which with fluidity will bring us to being to, previsibility or the possibility to be dependent on the system. And this will definitely help us along the supply chain. So more reliability and therefore more productivity as a result. My next question was for Mr. Hamilton. I wanted for him to talk more about the short distance maritime transport. How would this improve our supply chain? I don't know if you're able to respond in 15 seconds. Mr. Hamilton?
I'm going to suggest that perhaps if he wants, he can submit the answer to that question in writing. And we'll now move to Mr. Badaway for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we've heard a lot of the investments that are being made. I know Mayor Steele, as well as Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Jean-Aubry Morin spoke about some of the activities happening in the Niagara region and southwestern Ontario. I guess I'm going to ask Mr. Hamilton if you can hear me. Ian, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
He's trying to respond. I'm not sure he can respond. I was going to.
He might try to unplug his headset and plug it back in again.
Unplug your headset and plug it back in. And put your boom down on your mic too.
I'm gonna hold your time, Mr. Badaway.
Okay, no problem. Ian, put your boom down.
Is that better now?
Your mic. That's it.
Is that better now?
That's better. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thanks, guys. So I guess I talked and spoke about the establishment of the Niagara Ports Trade Corridor. Mr. Baldinelli brought up the investment on the Mid-Peninsula Corridor. Thank you for that. We spoke about the productivity that's happening, maybe possibly an anomaly in Canada, but what's happening in Niagara, based on a lot of the work that all the partners are doing together, the collaboration, et cetera. I'm going to ask Mr. Hamilton now the same question I asked Mr. Morin with respect to that corridor and his thoughts on how we expand the economic activity along that corridor. Second question is, do you think that a port authority being established along the Welland Canal Corridor would be beneficial? And lastly is the development of properties that are currently managed by the St. Lawrence Seaway, some of which now are managed by the Hamilton-Oshawa Port Authority, owned by Transport Canada, how that would play into the both productivity as well as the land or the economic development within the Niagara region. Mr. Hamilton?
Great, thank you for the question, and I'll build on Mr. Morin's statement around collaboration, and certainly we see that as the foundation for developing Niagara. Right now, there's been a very positive reception with both the region and all of the municipalities along the Welland Canal for HOPA to come in and do what we can to develop the area. In terms of in addition to just collaboration, I think there needs to be actual dollars and cents, infrastructure money spent to develop the facilities along the Welland Canal so that they can be we can really tap into their potential. One of the key areas is marrying together the different modes of transportation, ensuring that customers today have that modal choice. And it was brought up earlier that we're not necessarily trying to move everything to marine, but making sure that we can create the most sustainable supply chains, and that's marrying together rail, marine, and road, and giving the ability to structure the supply chains in a way that has the most beneficial attributes in terms of cost, environmental impact, and social benefits by reducing congestion. I certainly believe that the track record of HOPA in both Oshawa and in particular in Hamilton, and the start we're off to in Niagara would suggest that we could take on lands in along the Welland Canal, and in partnership with the St. Lawrence Seaway, find a very happy marriage where we can make the investments and work on that creation of those multimodal hubs and drive more cargo to the Seaway, and would applaud the expansion of authority into the Niagara region. And in a lot of ways, this may have already happened by lands being transferred to HOPA's letters patent in the last few months.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Final question to Mr. Reines. With the Niagara multimodal trade corridor being established, and of course, one would think it would only be between lake to lake, along the Welland Canal corridor. How do you see in the future the town of Fort Erie, the Peace Bridge in particular, being a part of that multimodal trade corridor, especially as it relates to fluidity?
Well, as has been talked about before, there's a lot of interconnectivity between all the modes of transportation. So material that comes into Hamilton gets loaded on a truck from short sea shipping. At some point, a lot of times it has to cross the border. So it's all related. The more we can do to make sure that the border functions at the border, there's been a lot of investment in infrastructure. It's the non-infrastructure stuff that really needs work in terms of processing time. No point putting a lot of money into building a new port of entry or expanding a port of entry and having 15 primary inspection booths if you're only going to staff half of them. So it's not just infrastructure, it's the human capital, the human resources, it's the processes, it's the procedures. All of it has to be interconnected amongst all the modes.
Thanks, Kyle.
Merci. Alors, continuons notre échange. Monsieur Morin.
Thank you. So let's continue, Mr. Morin. There are several briefs that were submitted. Affirming that the mandate of the corporation could be updated to include, economic development. It was suggested that the corporation could possibly get back some operating copies, find some new trade openings, and then find new revenues that would not be from the toll. So in your opinion, what would be the advantage of giving you new powers like that? Thank you very much for the question, through the chair. I think that the notion of the competitivity when we talk about looking for revenues is something that must be exploited with great care and great prudence. I just want to talk about a notion that was explained earlier, right off the bat, that the Seaway, in fact, feeds a market that would be the third world economy if it was a country. So the Seaway represents the flow of goods and cargoes from the US and Canada that goes through the Welland Canal and others. So being able to help the investment or the development of this network, and also to create a value in the Canadian and American economies. When it comes to the Seaway itself, it is a nonprofit corporation which can cover its own cost. And since it's marketing in terms of a dollar of the year, it was able to be at least at the same level as when it started in 1998. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you. Yes. Another question. Your board of director has representative for the provincial, federal level, and administrators that are named by the industry that are going to represent the carriers and sectors like cereals or steel. Do you think it would be possible to open positions for other groups, like we were talking earlier about the indigenous group? Could they have a representative, union representative? Would that be possible too, municipal representative?
Oui. Madame la Présidente.
Yes, Madam Chair, this question is more of the political nature, and I will the federal government decide.
We'll now turn to Mr. Cannings for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you, and I'm going to go back to Mr. Weller and just try to pick up where I left off with some complicated questions on, you know, in the middle of the pandemic or after the pandemic, you know, we learned that maybe these long supply chains weren't such a good idea. I know Canada and the U.S. have been talking about this nearshoring, friendshoring. What has Canada done since, you know, I know various reports have come out on this. What has Canada done and what should it be doing to help build that ecosystem, if that's what you call it, that would help us, you know, keep things under control and not be so out there when it comes to natural disasters or pandemics or whatever could hit us.
So colleagues going to interrupt. The bells are ringing. So we would need unanimous consent to continue. I would suggest that we continue with this final round of question for about 1.5 minutes, and then we adjourn so people can vote. Is that the agreement of the committee? Great.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I'll speak to what needs to happen, if that makes sense, and what isn't really happening yet. And I will keep this, again, in the context of small and medium manufacturers. Okay. A lot of the problems we've gotten into in the first place come from, and this is not to denigrate our manufacturing community at all, right? But it comes from a lack of executional knowledge. And what I mean by that is, there's an old saying, you have to be effective before you can be efficient. We have to relearn how to be effective. And the challenges against that, and the pandemic is what exposed this, is that we have a brain drain going on. We have several companies that have retiring owners and executives that have knowledge. That knowledge is not necessarily coming in behind them. It's leaving with them, right? We have to start educating a new generation of manufacturing on how to be effective and how to be productive. I'll give you a short analogy. I've heard many people, many learned people say that the biggest problems were just-in-time manufacturing from the pandemic. I couldn't disagree more. That is actually an example of the lack of knowledge that I am speaking to. Because just-in-time, people associate that with saying, well, you need no inventory, right? What it means is that it's a waste to have inventory that you don't need. It's not a waste to have what you do need to produce. So when we use terms and we highlight programs and everything else, and it's a checklist on some consultants, I'm a consultant, I shouldn't say that, but some consultants' checklist, right? Without understanding the balance behind it, it gets you in trouble every time. You have to be effective before you can be efficient. Many people around this room have talked about collaboration. That is key as well. So in the sector that I'm particularly concerned about, they are very isolated. They're not well connected. They're not online in terms of a conversation, not at all like our tech community is. and building an ecosystem there where they can start to leverage common knowledge, right? And an ecosystem that is similar to those that have been built by the tech community and sponsored by government would be next level for bringing us to where we need to be really competitive, in my opinion.
I want to thank all the witnesses for appearing today. Just a couple of notes for everyone. Next 3 meetings are on the supply chain study, and the committee will begin the study on seafood import policies on May 21st. So if you have witnesses to submit, please get those in by May 6th at 4 p.m. Otherwise, I consider the meeting adjourned.